Welcome. I'm Patricia Murphy, a political reporter with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. You are watching the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young debate series. This is the general election debate for candidates in District 6, Congressional District 6. In order to ensure everyone's safety, the candidates and panelists are participating from their homes. The Atlanta Press Club gives a special thank you to Georgia Public Broadcasting for helping organize these online debates. Let's meet the candidates. They are in alphabetical order: Karen Handel, a Republican who served as Georgia's Secretary of State and previously held the Congressional District 6 seat. Lucy McBath, a Democrat, has served as the representative of Congressional District 6 since 2018. Before that, she spent 30 years working for Delta Airlines. Now let's meet the panelists. They are Stanley Dunlap, a reporter with the Georgia Recorder, and Jorge Estevez, an anchor with WSB-TV. Now let's get started. Candidates will have 60 seconds to answer their questions and 30 seconds to respond for rebuttals. I will hold a piece of paper up, letting candidates know when they have 10 seconds remaining. For the full set of rules, please visit the Atlanta Press Club website at atlantapressclub.org. The start of the debate will include each candidate being asked 2 questions. George, you get the first question to Lucy McBath.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. This is question number 1 for Ms. McBath. The Affordable Care Act, it's set to go before the Supreme Court. There is a federal supplement for people who have coverage but are considered low income. If the Supreme Court upholds the ruling coming their way, that responsibility moves to the states to then fund low-income families. Here's the question. How do you propose the state of Georgia funds that part of the program?
As a 2-time breast cancer survivor myself, I've been dealing with my own mortality, and I can tell you the last thing I was concerned about was my hospital bills. I've co-sponsored legislation in Washington that actually would lower the cost of prescription drugs, treatment, and care for people like me that have pre-existing conditions. But my opponent's record on health care is absolutely dismal. Karen Handel supported bills that would actually raise the cost of health care and treatment and prescription drugs for people that have pre-existing conditions. We've got about 45,000 children under the age of 17 in this district that have pre-existing conditions. My opponent also attempted to cut funding for cancer screenings provided by Planned Parenthood. And I'm so thankful that she was not successful in doing so, but I promise to continue to fight to make sure that health care is accessible to each and every one. It is not a privilege. That is your right as an American.
Thank you, Ms. McBath.
I would like to address,
Ms. Handel, would you like to have rebuttal, please?
Yes, I would. Lucy McBath has spent the past 2 years, and especially in this campaign, blatantly lying about my record. I have always supported protections for people with pre-existing conditions. I had legislation that I co-sponsored in Congress to do just that. It's important to listen to what Lucy says, not listen to what she says and look at what she does, because this is the fact. She has had an opportunity for 2 years to pass legislation for pre-existing conditions, and she hasn't. Why? Because the Democrats don't want to solve the problem. They want a political talking point for campaign ads. Look at what she does.
Thank you, Ms. Handel. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Ms. Handel. Stanley Dunlap, you may now ask your question to Ms. Handel.
We've seen the Supreme Court the hearing start for Supreme Court nominee Amy Coney Barrett this week. And Ms. Handel, you've come out in support of her becoming a justice, but why do you support this happening, the hearings taking place so close to an election? And also, do you think the confirmation should take precedence over getting the COVID-19 stimulus package passed?
Well, first of all, a president is elected for 4 years, not 3.5 years or 3 years and 9 months. Even Justice Ginsburg acknowledged that. It is any president's constitutional right and obligation to move forward with a nomination. And then that goes through the Senate process. And I think it's important for people to remember that it was the Democrats that changed the rules when they couldn't get their way. The real issue here, as things move forward, is where is Lucy McBath going to be on packing the courts? I oppose it. We shouldn't change the rules just to try to move forward with politics.
All right, Ms. McBath, do you have a rebuttal?
Well, I honestly have to say the only one that I believe is actually trying to pack the courts is Mitch McConnell and President Trump. However, what I will say is I'm very concerned about Judge Barrett's policy agenda, wanting to possibly dismantle the Affordable Care Act that millions of Americans are depending on, and also her stance on choice. I'm very concerned that she might take away the choice of a woman to choose what's best with her body. And I will continue to champion it in Washington to make sure that people have access to affordable health care, especially those with pre-existing conditions, and always making sure that a woman has the ability to choose what's best for her body with her health care provider.
Thank you, Ms. McBath. Stanley, please ask your next question to Lucy McBath.
About 3,000 votes separated the two of you in the last election, and there could be another close race this time as well. Since the start of early voting yesterday here in Georgia, we've seen many voters stand in line for hours on end, and we've had legal battles about the security of electronic voting machines versus hand-marked paper ballots, and we've heard claims from President Trump that absentee ballots and other Republicans will lead to more fraud. What should be done to ensure voters don't become discouraged, and do you have confidence that the outcome of your election and others this November will be accurate?
Well, first, I'd like to say in Congress, I have actually sponsored comprehensive legislation that would protect the integrity of our elections, also affording funding for our election security. And in the Georgia primary, you know, the nation has watched. Thousands were prevented from exercising the right to vote in a timely way as they stood in long lines with till midnight and in the heat and sometimes understaffed polling stations. We've got to make sure that voting is fair and that we have to make sure that we continue to do so. My opponent, Karen Handel, has a long history of obstructing people's ability to be able to vote. When she was Secretary of State, and actually, you know, she was found by the Justice Department to have actually violated the Voting Rights Act when she suppressed thousands and thousands of people's ability to be able to vote, to exercise their right to vote. So that is, I believe, that is not just a privilege, that is a right that every American should have. And people fought and died in this country to exercise their right to vote. We have to protect.
Thank you. Ms. Handel, do you have a rebuttal?
I do. You know, with respect, Lucy McBath has no idea what she's talking about. I actually oversaw the 2008 presidential election with President Obama on the ballot, and it was successful and effective with photo ID. In fact, the most people ever voted in that election with historic turnout, especially among minorities. What Lucy McBath is failing to tell you is that the legislation she supports would give her $5 million of your taxpayer money to run her campaign.
Thank you, Ms. Handel. And George, you get the final question this round for Karen Handel.
So let's talk about money, shall we? Here we go. The next round of stimulus. We could see the next round put up for a vote early next year, let's say. Democrats want to push a multi-trillion-dollar bill for state, county, and city governments. A lot of programs here in our state, in Georgia, rely on stimulus money because, let's face it, their revenue has run out. MARTA, one of those programs, transports people around the area. How will you approach the reality of Americans needing more help as we dive deeper into this pandemic, and where should that money go?
Thank you. Families and small businesses across the country, they definitely need more relief. And it is just an absolute shame that Democrats like Lucy McBath are playing political games with the package. At the very least, what should happen is Republicans and Democrats should come together to reappropriate the over $1 billion that hasn't been spent yet, or give states flexibility to spend those dollars in other areas to best meet the needs of citizens on the ground here in the 6th District, across Georgia and across the country. Then we need to get our economy going again. And that's not going to happen with a $4 trillion tax hike proposed by the Vice President Biden. We need to keep taxes low. That's a tax plan that Lucy McBath called the tax sham that fueled the greatest economy that anyone on this call has seen in their lifetimes, lifting millions of people up and out of poverty. So thank you for that great question.
Thank you, Ms. Handel. Ms. McBath, did you have a rebuttal to that?
Yes, every day I talk to people in the district that are still reeling and hurting from COVID-19. And long before this pandemic hit our American shores, I worked across the aisle to introduce a bill that would actually modernize the public health data systems by which the CDC would be able to respond to this public health crisis, this pandemic. And I'm proud to say that that funding was included in the overall package for CARES spending to respond to COVID-19. And when COVID-19 began impacting our country, I hosted numerous teletown halls and bringing forth all of the resources and information and tools for people in this district to be able to respond to this pandemic and come through it in a quality manner of life.
Thank you, Ms. McBath. Well, that concludes the first portion of the debate. The candidates will now take turns asking each other a question. Candidates will have 15 seconds to ask the question, 60 seconds to respond, and 30 seconds for a rebuttal. And by random selection, Karen Handel, you may ask the first question to Ms. McBath.
Thank you. I would like to know, since we are in the middle of the Supreme Court hearings today and the rest of this week, do you support packing the courts? Because remember, while the nomination process goes through the Senate, any legislation that would expand the number of Supreme Court justices would come through the U.S. House of Representatives, specifically Judiciary Committee, which both of us have served on. Yes or no, would you support legislation to expand the Supreme Court?
As I've said before, I believe the only individuals that are willing to pack the court would be Mitch McConnell and President Trump. As a two-time breast cancer survivor, I'm concerned about Judge Barrett's record on health care. As I said before, because she supports decisions that would actually take away the Affordable Care Act for millions of people and also taking away from women their ability to be able to choose what's best for their bodies. And the only people that are willing to pack the Supreme Court, as I said, is Mitch McConnell and President Trump. And I'm frankly just very disillusioned with the overall mismanagement of COVID-19. That's where we should be focusing our time and our energy, making sure that people still have the tools and the resources they need, the funding to be able to get through this pandemic. People are still reeling and they're still hurting all over the United States.
Ms. Handel, did you have a rebuttal?
Apparently, Representative McBath doesn't understand the process. It was a very simple question, yes or no. Do you support legislation to expand the U.S. Supreme Court as Senator Schumer has proposed, as Speaker Pelosi has said she wants to do? And let's be honest with the people watching today and are going to watch later. There is nothing preventing Democrats like you and Speaker Pelosi from getting to the table on that COVID relief package. You don't want to pass it because you want to pack it full of controversial issues. You could get it done if you had the will to do it.
Thank you, Ms. Handel. And Lucy McBath, it's now your turn to ask a question of Karen Handel.
Thank you so much. Ms. Handel, you listed your source of income as coming from GLA, I believe, Georgia Life Alliance, a group which would actually deny choice to women who are victims of rape and incest, and also has been found to be pushing dangerous medical procedures on women. Did you list this group by its initials to hide from voters your role with such a radical group?
Oh, that is ridiculous, Lucy McBath. The organization goes by GLA here in the state of Georgia. So I don't appreciate the insinuations that you're making. Look, the issue of life, it's no secret I'm pro-life. Yes, I help that organization with business strategy. But that's a really emotional and personal issue for everyone, and there's very different opinions. I would submit to the people of the 6th District that the only person with an extreme view on abortion is on this call, because Lucy, you have voted multiple times to deny life-saving medical care to a baby born alive. It's really disgraceful and it's inhumane. And I would like to think we could all agree that that would be something we could support.
Ms. McBath?
Thank you so much. Voters cannot trust you to stand up for a woman's right to choose, Ms. Handel. In Congress, you voted to jail doctors who perform abortions, and you even defended the most extreme abortion ban in the entire country, which would expose women to life in prison or even the death penalty. You tried to hide your payments from this radical organization, and you cannot be trusted to fight for women in our community. And I will continue to oppose any ability that you might put forth that would prevent a woman from being able to exercise her right to choose what's
right.
best for her body.
Thank you. And that concludes our second round. For those just joining us, this is the debate between candidates for Congressional District 6. We will now go back to the panel to ask questions until we run out of time. I will determine when a rebuttal is appropriate, but candidates may raise their hand if they feel they should get a rebuttal. George, you get the first question in this round.
All right, here we go. Let's talk about Medicaid, shall we? Medicaid expansion is a topic that Georgia has had to deal with, as have other states. The state asking for waivers, been declined. The Affordable Care Act turns 10. Then it will start to wean the states off of funding for Medicaid expansion. There are countless Georgians who are underinsured or not insured at all. How should Congress proceed? Should they suspend it, amend it, or follow it?
And George, who have you asked that to?
Oh, that question will go to the next person would be Lucy McBath.
Thank you. As a two-time breast cancer survivor, I mean, as I said before, when I was facing my own mortality, the last thing on my mind was my hospital bills. And I've co-sponsored legislation that actually has passed through the House to lower the cost of prescription drugs and treatment and care for people like me that have pre-existing conditions. And also, too, we need to be making sure that we're protecting our seniors in the country. I have sponsored legislation that would actually protect our seniors. I've sponsored legislation that would actually work with Social Security Administration right here in the district to make sure that we are protecting Medicare and protecting those benefits for our seniors. They shouldn't be worried about how they're going to pay their bills or how they're going to make sure that they're keeping from their homes being foreclosed on. And I want to make sure that we continue to expand on those benefits from Medicare, making sure that everyone has coverage because that's what people deserve.
Thank you, Ms. McBath. Stanley, it's now your turn to ask a question.
Yes. The response by President Trump and his administration to the pandemic has been heavily criticized by many medical experts and Democrats. Republicans counter that the president is taking the virus seriously while also balancing the economic concerns. And here in Georgia, Governor Brian Kemp has repeatedly encouraged people to follow CDC guidelines, but cut short mask mandates, even after reopening the state. How do you rate both the president and Kemp's response during the pandemic? And that's for Lucy McBath.
Well, I will tell you that, as I said before, that I talk to constituents every day who are still reeling from COVID-19, but I'm very proud of the work that we've done in Washington with bipartisan legislation. My colleagues and I have proposed over $250 billion that would go to our small businesses, but also we've lowered the taxes for those that have been most adversely affected by this pandemic. We've also expanded the tax credit for the hardworking families during this pandemic, but still so much more needs to be done. As I said, I talk to people all the time, our small business leaders that still haven't received PPP, our frontline workers are still without the resources and tools that they need. We need to appropriate more funding for testing and tracing and treatment and a vaccine. And we need to be following the science and the researches that substantiate the need for us to make sure that we're social distancing, wearing masks, and making sure that we are washing our hands and doing everything that we can to mitigate this pandemic. There's still so much more work that needs to be done. And yes, I'm proud that the House is still trying to work with the Senate. We've not left the table trying to appropriate the resources that America needs.
Thank you, Ms. McBath. Georgia,
I'd like to address this issue.
Go ahead, Ms. Handel. All right.
Thank you. I'd very much like to address this issue. You know, COVID continues to take a tremendous toll on lives and livelihoods. But if you're listening to health and science experts, they are now saying there's reason to be encouraged. This has been an unprecedented crisis for our nation across multiple fronts. Healthcare, yes, but also the economy, mental health, addiction. our young people in abusive homes who can't get to schools. And, rather than spending time trying to grade people, it brings me to Congress. And listen, the American people, they deserve better than this. The Democrats need to get to the table and work this out for the American people.
Thank you, Ms. Handel. Jorge Estevez, it's your turn for a question.
I'd like to ask Ms. Handel that same question I asked Ms. McBath, which is about Medicaid expansion. States asked for waivers. They've been declined. Now the Affordable Care Act turns 10, weaning the states off their Medicaid expansion money. Countless Georgians underinsured or not insured at all. Ms. Handel, question for you. How should Congress proceed with this? Should they suspend it, amend it, or follow it?
Thank you. A couple of things. First, the last that I have seen, those waivers are coming for the states. Secondly, when it comes specifically to Medicaid, which I think my opponent didn't understand the difference between Medicaid and Medicare, when it comes to Medicaid, having some block grants would be very helpful for states like Georgia and other states across the country so that they can really build out a healthcare system that best meets the needs of Georgians. In Congress, what we need to do to fix the gaps in healthcare, a couple of things. One, we need that standalone legislation to protect pre-existing conditions. I'll be a champion for that again, just like I was when I was in Congress, and we're going to get it done. Secondly, we need more choices, not less. Did you know that on the exchanges, there are only 2 plans remaining for people in the 6th district to choose from? That's worse health care, not better. And for a vulnerable population that falls through the cracks, I was proud to support more funding for our community health centers, and I'd like to see us strengthen that network even more.
Thank you, Ms. Handel. And Stanley Dunlap, it is your turn for a question of the candidates. I'm sorry, rebuttal to Ms. McBath. I apologize.
No, thank you so much. I support expansion of healthcare, always have. My opponent is trying to hide her vote to slash up to $1 billion from the CDC's ability to fight infectious diseases. And she chose to ignore the warnings of all the researchers and the scientists and the healthcare advocates and cut this funding just before this pandemic hit America. This is the kind of reckless mistake that she has made. These are the reasons why people rejected her in 2018 and why I'm sure they will reject her again in 2020.
All right. Well, that is all we have. That is all the time we have for questions. Each candidate.
In the interest of fairness, I would like to respond to that.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
She introduced a new topic. It is absolutely not true that I voted to cut CDC spending. I don't know where Ms. McBath gets that from, but apparently truth in advertising is missing. In her ads, she actually cites memos and legislation that passed before I was even in Congress. In fact, under my time, I voted to increase the funding at the CDC and for an important realignment and reorganization to better prioritize health pandemic responses. So, Lucy, I know you want to lie about my record in the interest of being able to hide your own 97% vote record with Nancy Pelosi.
Ms. McBath, do you have a rebuttal to that?
Karen and Ms. Handel, you have said over and over again that you've aligned yourself 98% of the time with President Trump and his policies. And once again, your record on healthcare is absolutely dismal. You have supported bills that would drive up the cost of healthcare for people that have pre-existing conditions, not only their treatment, their care, and prescription drugs. And also, you attempted to cut funding for cancer screenings provided by Planned Parenthood, and you don't want anyone to know this, but you have failed over and over again. You have failed this district, and you have continued to lie and discredit the good people in this district, and that is the reason why they voted you out.
Thank you, Ms. McBath. Well, I'm afraid that's all we have time for questions. Each candidate will now have 60 seconds for a closing statement. Lucy McBath, you get the first closing statement.
Thank you. I never expected to be in Congress. And after the murder of my son, I realized that our leadership was not doing enough to keep our communities healthy and safe. So I decided to run for office myself. In Congress, I have held the first in-person town halls that this district has seen in decades, and I've worked tirelessly to ensure my constituents have had access to vital information and resources that they've needed during this pandemic. And I've written bipartisan legislation that the president has actually signed into law to protect our veterans, and I've secured emergency funding for the CDC and fought to protect our seniors and people with pre-existing conditions. There's a lot of negativity and partisanship in America right now, and that's exactly what I'm running against. It's been my honor to serve you these last 2 years, and I hope that I have earned the privilege to continue the good work that we have begun in this district with your vote November 3rd.
Thank you, Congresswoman McBath. And Karen Handel, you have the final closing statement.
Thank you. It's not about what Lucy McBath says. It's about what she does. And she votes 97% of the time with Nancy Pelosi to increase taxes, give benefits to illegal immigrants, slash funding for local law enforcement, and yes, to release violent felons. She is a one-issue activist who will not speak up or stand up for you. She will go along with Nancy Pelosi for a $4 trillion tax hike, government-run healthcare, taking away employer-provided health insurance, defunding the police, and taking away local zoning controls. The people of this district, you know me. You know I work hard to fight through the politics to get the job done. Why? Because that's what I have done. Cutting taxes, fighting the opioid crisis, more funding for community health centers, mental health, and our veterans. I am asking for your vote so that together we can defeat COVID, rebuild our economy, actually fix the gaps in healthcare, and keep our neighborhoods safe. Thank
All
you,
right.
and God bless you.
Thank you, Ms. Handel. And that concludes our debate. We'd like to remind voters that Election Day is Tuesday, November 3rd. Don't forget to turn in your absentee ballot if you requested one. And early in-person voting began yesterday and continues through October 30th. Thank you to the candidates and panel for participating in this debate. I'd also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club and Georgia Public Broadcasting for arranging today's debate. For more information and the full schedule of debates, please visit atlantapressclub.org. This debate will also be available to viewers watching on demand at Atlanta Press Club's Facebook page and on Georgia Public Broadcasting's website, gpb.org. I'm Patricia Murphy. Thank you for joining us at the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series.